My name is Jeff Bezos, and you're listening to the Invisible Hand Podcast. The world's ran by human nature, self-interest, and power. Let's get into it. Hey, what's going on, everybody, and welcome to the Invisible Hand Podcast. And today we're going to be talking about a very specific topic. If Jeff Bezos was black, would Amazon exist? And my argument, it would not exist. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking, oh, he's going to tell us how systematic racism is the reason why if Jeff Bezos was black, Amazon would not exist. And actually, I wouldn't say it's because of racism. I would say it's because of conditions and self-interest that a black Jeff Bezos, even if he started Amazon back in 1994, if he was a black man trying to start it, exact same person, exact same intelligence, all the things that he would have needed to happen, most likely, or the probability of it happening would be very, very low. Therefore, if Jeff Bezos was black, Amazon most likely would not exist. Let's get into it. So one of the reasons that I think if Jeff Bezos was black, Amazon wouldn't exist is, first of all, the conditions and the probability of those conditions that would make a person like Jeff Bezos. So I'm not going to get too much deep. I'm going to run through that very quickly. So the conditions, then the support system you're going to need, even if you had an ideal like to build a virtual bookstore, and the support you're going to need to make that happen, the probability if he was black for him to actually have that support would be significantly lower. And lastly, the most important of all, the access to capital. Even if he was Jeff Bezos and had the exact same life as Jeff Bezos, if he was African American, the statistical probability of him having access to early stage capital, whether it's from his family, whether it's from friends, and the statistical probability of him having access to early stage venture capitalists who will be willing to back his actual ideal and trust in it and take risks in it would be significantly lower. So I'm going to get into very specific details. And toward the end of this video, I'm going to tell you why I think it's relevant. And first of all, this video is basically aimed toward anybody interested in the topic, but also specifically aimed toward African Americans, because there's a big lesson from looking at this from this perspective. So this is a thought experiment. And so let's just first, everybody probably by now know who Jeff Bezos is. Jeff Bezos is basically the founder and creator of Amazon.com. When he first created Amazon, he wanted to name it Cadabra, which was probably not a good idea, but he changed it to Amazon, right? Jeff Bezos graduated from Princeton University with a degree in electrical engineering. Then later he jumped around at a few other companies, and then eventually he landed at a New York investment bank called D.E. Shaw & Co. So he actually became one of the youngest, basically vice presidents of the company's history. So he was basically a high achiever. He created clubs in high school. He even went to college to study physics. Quickly he realized that physics was a little above his math grade, and he changed to electrical engineering. And then in around 1994, he founded basically the bookstore Amazon. So in this thought experiment, if Jeff Bezos was an African American person and his life played out and he went through the same conditions as a black person, would he have ended up with Amazon.com, right? Because this argument is really America's all about merit. And as long as you have the skills and the knowledge and talent, that you're going to be successful, right? So let's just do this thought experiment with Jeff Bezos. So point number one, conditions, right? This is early stages in life, right? So let's look at this. Jeff Bezos basically was adopted by a man who was Cuban, who was ultimately an engineer, right? He was an engineer. So he was a middle-class person, very accomplished. And Jeff Bezos was a very intelligent, smart student, right? So he probably had the mind or the neuroplasticity to be able to do engineering. He was good with spatial recognition, geometric shapes, math, and science, right? So hypothetically, Jeff Bezos probably went to a good school where he probably had a safe home environment where he was able to go to school, study, focus on math and science. The proper school environment when he got to school, it wasn't so much craziness going on where he could focus on it. So hypothetically, if Jeff Bezos is black, the probability of him being born in a low-income family significantly goes up, right? So the probability of him being born in a low-income family significantly goes up. If Jeff Bezos is black, let's say he's a black guy with the same capacity to do engineering, the probability of him going to a school in a school district that's underfunded significantly goes up. On average, African American neighborhoods have less quality schools when it comes to actual funding, the amount of education for the teachers, and just the overall environment. The neighborhood, they have higher crime, they have more distractions in their school. So if you take all of those probabilities of Jeff Bezos being a young black African American kid, the probability of him being distracted at school, the probability of him having maybe a unsafe or even very, very distracting home environment, right? So a lot of African American kids grow up in kind of disruptive home environments because a lot of African Americans socioeconomically struggle. And everybody knows socioeconomic struggle affects the family life, affects the relationship between the man and the woman, and then it can create an turbulent environment that's not conducive of a smart kid who's going to end up doing engineering to be able to focus when he go to school. Right? So if Jeff Bezos was black, the statistical probability of him being distracted when he's at school, the statistical probability of him being distracted and getting a lower quality education because he's going to lower funded schools significantly goes up, right? So right there, just him being black, long before we even get into Amazon, which we're going to get to the real reason why, most likely if Jeff Bezos was black, Amazon wouldn't exist. Right there, that's affecting his ability to become an engineer. Because let's be honest, in order for a kid to become an engineer, it's highly likely and it's very important for him to get foundational knowledge. So if you go to a really bad school with a really bad educational system that's low funded and there's lots of distractions, it's a probability that that kid may not get the basic math, science, algebra, calculus, and all that stuff that you should get in middle school and high school, that when you get to college, you're ready to take on the more challenging math and sciences that will eventually lead to being an engineer. Furthermore, if Jeff Bezos was black, even if he made it out of high school and got to college, a lot of kids who take up engineering typically come from middle-class families. Why? Engineering, math, science, and STEM is more challenging subjects. It requires way more dedication. The average engineering program graduate a smaller percentage of the students than like business. They intentionally make it hard because they want to find the most critical thinkers who actually have the minds for engineering. So the challenge of being able to even go to school and become an engineer, if you don't have a good home life, if you don't come from a middle-class family where you have a family who could support you, and the cost on average of engineering compared to basic business school is significantly more. So right there, the probability statistically of Jeff Bezos actually becoming an engineer goes significantly down if he's black. So if he's not an engineer, the probability of him ending up on Wall Street, the probability of him starting a technology-based business goes significantly down. So you can see where I'm getting at this. I'm showing you that a lot of these people who become tech entrepreneurs, people like Jeff Bezos, and remember, in this example, you could easily replace Jeff Bezos with Apple's founder, Steve Jobs, Microsoft founders, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg. It doesn't matter. What have allowed these people to achieve is the fact that they are talented individuals who have a system around them to support and maximize their talent. Even if you're a smart, intelligent African American, without the system and structures around you, you cannot maximize the talent. So let's look at some statistics here. Probability of becoming an engineer. Well, let's look at the engineering graduation rate. 72% of engineers in the United States are white, and only 4% are black. It's probably slightly lower than that, right? Then you have right after that, Hispanics at 11%, Asians at 9.9%. A lot of this stuff is socioeconomically driven, plus other structural problems in the black community. But just looking at the statistics, if Jeff Bezos was black, just off of the statistics, there's only 4% of engineers are black that graduate in the United States. So his probability of even being Jeff Bezos, the electrical engineer, goes significantly down, right? But we're gonna get into the real reasons why Jeff Bezos probably would not have created Amazon if he was black. And it got more to do with venture capitalists and early stage investors. Okay. Now, just to kind of drive some of these points home, Jeff Bezos, basically, when he was 26, was a very talented guy. He first took a job at a company called Bankers Trust. It's a privately held financial institution. And by 26, straight out of school, after a couple other jobs, he became the vice president that quick at a bank. At 26 years old, he was able to rise through the ranks and become basically VP. Later, he left to work with D.E. Shaw and Co., where by 29 to 30, he became the youngest VP at an investment bank, at that particular investment bank. The probability of that happening in the early 90s for an African-American kid coming into an organization that's probably 70, 80% black is very, very low. Okay? So the pedigree, not to mention, and then I mentioned that Jeff Bezos went to Princeton University, which probably cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not $200,000 to get an electrical engineering degree from, probably in debt. The probability of a black student even having a family where they can afford to go to Princeton goes significantly down. So there's a lot of factors that play into Bezos being Bezos, right? And it's not just based around how talented he is. He could have been the smartest guy in the world. He may not have been able to go to Princeton. Maybe he would have got a scholarship and went to another university, but not Princeton. And then as he came out of school, by 26, he was a VP at a bank. Then he was VP at an investment bank by 29. And then as he was a VP at an investment bank at 29, the internet was kicking off. And so you had one of his bosses wanted him to start researching the internet and how its growth rate. And then in the process of him realizing how fast the internet was growing, which was like 2,000%, he realized he wanted to start a company. And so Jeff Bezos quit 2 high-paying jobs as a basically vice president. So think about this. You're a kid that's hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. You're able to become VP vice president by 26, and then a vice president at an investment bank by 29, all through rising through the ranks. That means that people were open and comfortable allowing you to ascend. Let's be honest, the law of human nature, people basically trust and take risks around people they're comfortable with from their own community. And a lot of times your own community is dictated by your race. And so I'm not saying that's the only reason he succeeded. He's clearly a talented person, but people who are talented are able to succeed within their own group first. And so if your own group owns the majority of companies and businesses and you're talented within that group, they'll be happy to lift you up. What people don't naturally do is allow people to come outside of their group and be their leader. So if I'm mainly a Asian company like Alibaba, and I'm a talented black dude, even though I'm talented, they'll let me rise up the ranks, but they're not gonna let me ascend to the top because I'm outside of their group. And groups in general don't just openly let people outside of their group come be the top of their group. They may let you in your group, but not to be at the top of your group. That's the same thing here. Bezos, basically kind of a white European person. He's talented, he's within his own group. So they're able to acknowledge that, allow him to ascend. So right there, those 2 opportunities would not have happened if Jeff Bezos was black. It's highly unlikely that he would have been a VP at 26 and then another vice president at an investment bank by 29, even if you're super talented. So a lot of times, African Americans specifically, when they are hyper successful, they typically have families who are not. And typically, very, very successful individual African Americans, let's say Jeff Bezos was black at this time, are going to be taking care of other family members. Most of the time, it's going to probably be their parents who probably don't have a savings, who statistically probably didn't go to college, right? So the probability of Bezos quitting these 2 high-paying, highly achieved jobs to go start an internet company significantly goes down if Jeff Bezos is black. You see all these structural things that you have to think about if you're a black person, if you were able to have the life like Jeff Bezos to extend to the top. And the reason I bring this up is I want you to pay attention each time I go through this analogy, how many other people are involved in Jeff Bezos' success, and why a lot of African Americans need to realize that you have to work together with your own group. Not because white people are racist, because you have to do what's in people's self-interest. White people do what's in their own self-interest. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's perfectly natural as a human being. And from this example, this is exactly what we have to do more of. So he quit 2 VP jobs to go start an internet company in 1994. Okay, now I want you to really understand what that means to quit 2 vice president jobs, just to put it into example. Out of 279 top executives listed at the 50 biggest companies in the S&P 100, 274 are white, Hispanic, Asian, and other ethnicities. That means out of the top 100 companies, out of the top 279 companies, 274 of these people, probably a majority white, are white. And out of those 279 top executives, only 5 are black. That's just a small example of how little and how rare do black individuals in business actually ascend to the top of corporate structures. So if Jeff Bezos was black, would he have ascended at 26 to 2 VP executive roles within 2 or 3 years, and then quit those roles to go take a big risk starting an internet company? So right there, those actions that led up to him eventually quitting to start an internet company would have significantly been reduced if he was black, because it's highly likely he would have never been a VP, especially at 2 companies, and he most likely would not have quit them to go start an internet company and take massive risks. Okay, let's continue. Now, the next very, very important thing to consider is when starting a company, a lot of companies are started by people who have initial support.
Hey guys, here's a few words from our sponsors. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll be right back.
The future of legal betting is finally here. Place a bet using Bitcoin right over the phone. Unlike traditional gambling sites, every bet you make with us is guaranteed a 50% probability of winning. All of our bets are one-on-one against a real person and never the house. We offer some of the most unique bets in the industry. Bets like, will LeBron James win his 5th NBA title? Will Joe Biden be elected for a 2nd term? Will Tesla be worth $1 trillion by the end of 2022? You can bet on if it'll rain tomorrow. You can literally bet on any future event. Text the phrase "I bet" to the number on the screen, and I'll reply back with a list of all of our available bets. Again, text 323-536-2313. Again, text 323-536-2313 today. Jeff Bezos initially did a $300,000 investment, which he got from his parents. Now, if Jeff Bezos was black, on average, would a black parent even have $300,000 to loan their son to take a risky bet in an internet business? The probability of black person having a network or a family member, specifically their parents, who can loan them $300,000 out of their life savings. Now, I want you to think about this, because I want you to think about the low saving rate and stock market participation of black people. Only 44% of black Americans have a retirement savings account. That's just having an account. There's only a smaller percentage of black African American kids who actually have parents who can loan them to start a company that they know nothing about in a new industry like the internet back in 1994 and give them $300,000. If Jeff Bezos was black, the probability of him having a parent that can give him that money to start that company is significantly low. It's very likely that that company would never have been started. Not only that, but after taking that $300,000 investment, Jeff Bezos was able to get over $50K of seed capital from individual friends and family investors. That means he knew 20 people, not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5, but 20 people who could loan him under the guise of friends and family $50K each. Now, let's be realistic here. If Jeff Bezos was an African American person, would he even have 5, less alone 20 friends and family who would be willing to give him $50,000 each, who would even have $50,000 each to loan him to start on a risky industry like the internet. Remember, the internet back in 1994 didn't even barely exist fully. We had AOL still. They had no idea that's going to be what it is today. So if you start taking into consideration all these other factors it took for Jeff Bezos to actually get this off the ground, there's so many luck, there's so many conditions, there's so many support people who played, there were so many criteria that already existed in his life that allowed it to be him. But if he was black, the probability of those things being in place significantly goes down. I would say if out of 100%, those conditions outside of him just being smart and being Jeff Bezos, his position, his probability of doing those things go down by over probably 70%, right? And so eventually, after getting those initial investments from his family and his 20 angel investors, he was able to get investment from Kleiner Perkins for $8 million seed round, which ultimately ended up him going public. The number one reason why, if Jeff Bezos was black, Amazon would not exist is because the structure of venture capital and the access of venture capital for African Americans. And I'm going to get down into the very specific reasons why. And it's not because of racism. It's about human nature. Ultimately, he was able to get an $8 million seed round from Kleiner Perkins. Now, I want you to really, really understand this. Black startup entrepreneurs still received only a tiny fraction of the 1.2% of a record $147 billion in venture capital invested in the U.S. That means out of $147 billion, black founders only got 1.2% of that capital. That's how little, historically, and even today in 2021, that venture capitalists invest in black founders. So really at its core, if Jeff Bezos was black, the probability of him getting a $8 million investment from a venture capitalist in 1994, when the internet was virtually unknown at that scale, is probably somewhere around 5%. So it's highly likely that if Jeff Bezos was black, Amazon would not exist. To understand why Amazon may not have existed, you need to understand why venture capitalists typically do not invest in black founders. Number one, I think structurally it comes down to risk and self-interest. Most people who start companies with people that look like them. They're typically friends, people they grow up around, and people they know. I want to give you an example to prove this. If you look at Amazon's first 10 employees, what do you see? They're all white. If you look at Microsoft's first 10 employees, what do you see? They're all white. Same thing with Apple's, same thing with Facebook's. And that's what people do. Now you might think, okay, those are just employees. What they have to do with venture capitalists? Well, if you think about this, when you start a startup or a company, it's highly risky. You're risking your time and your personal savings a lot of times. And so that's money. That's things that people care about a lot. So if you're going to do something risky like that, you're going to be very, very stringent about who you're willing to do it with. So the proof's in the pudding. Most startups are started by people who know the person very, very well. And even their first 10 employees typically be people from their own group, culture, or race, because they're comfortable with these people. If you look at these companies, once again, Microsoft, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, most of their top 10 employees when they first start these companies are all white. This same dynamic exists with venture capitalists. They're risking their hard-earned money, and they want to risk it with people that they're comfortable and familiar with. So if Jeff Bezos asked for an $8 million investment to start a digital bookstore that nobody ever heard of, and he was black, they would be very, very uncomfortable and unsure that they're willing to do it. And there's a high probability that Amazon would not exist. Now let's look at some statistics and facts. The fact is, the vast majority, over 80% of all major venture capitalists who have significant capital are white. Also, a lot of venture capitalists carry what they call unconscious bias. That means that they have something called pattern matching. What is pattern matching? Pattern matching means that they tend to look for a certain criteria of person who end up being successful in startups. But if you look at it, the majority of engineers in America are white. The majority of people who has been successful building startups are white. And so what they're used to seeing is white founders being successful. They're meeting thousands of entrepreneurs who are pitching them, and they're basically seeing a pattern of what type of person or founder or criteria a person ends up successful. Well, if all those people are white and you show up black, they have nothing to compare you to. They don't see you as the prototype for a successful founder. So your probability of getting a favorable projection of them taking risks on significantly goes up. Again, if Jeff Bezos was black, it's highly likely he would have never got that VC investment and Amazon would not exist. So what I want you to understand is, let's backtrack on all this, is African Americans must work together in order to have a future in technology and business, because groups have self-interest. And when it comes to risking their capital, they're going to risk it on people they're comfortable with, that live in the community with them, that they grew up around, that they're familiar with, and that they would hang out with. And you're not from their group. I think people need to understand this, that we live in America and we're all American. However, we also live in a country that's one of the most diverse countries in the world, with significantly large groups, 44 million blacks, 50 plus million Mexicans, a significant 100 plus million whites, and a couple million Asians and others. And all of these groups, though they are American, are competing. And yes, we will hire them at our jobs. I will hire white people at my job. Maybe whites will hire blacks at their job. But typically, in hierarchies of power, large groups do not select people outside of their group to be in high-level leadership positions. It's just the nature of who we are as humans. So most startups and most venture capital is high-level positions in society that are highly sought after. The probability of significant amount of African Americans getting funding, getting backed, and becoming leaders in technology will not be driven by other groups giving you that power, which means you need to work with your own people. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Out.